Welcome to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. The purpose of this podcast is to provide you with a candid conversation about our energy needs, our energy security, and your energy future. Texas oil and natural gas have made our nation the world's energy leader, constantly innovating and investing to fuel the economy, protect the environment, and power the world. This industry is fast-paced, high-tech, and essential to improving modern life. And we're here to talk about it. You're listening to TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Well, welcome back to another exciting episode of TXOGA Talks. I'm Todd Staples with the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Very proud to announce today that we have released our 2024 Energy and Economic Impact Report. It's record-breaking numbers, and we're going to discuss those numbers with you today. You can find a copy of the report on our website, TXOGA.org. We'll also put the information in the show notes for this episode. Very pleased to have with me today the numbers guy at TXOGA, Dr. Dean Foreman, the Chief Economist at TXOGA. Dean's good to be with you today to discuss some numbers that you and James Laval worked on very extensively, and other members of our team, by gathering and putting this data together from public sources. Is that right?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And this is a really compelling year worth of data. So this report is something everybody should be looking at for the state of Texas.
That's exactly right, particularly as we begin the next session of the Texas legislature. These numbers influence how much money goes to the counties, to the schools, to several different funds that are so important to Texas. And I'll tell you that FY 2024 was another record-breaking year in the Texas oil and natural gas industry. This industry paid a record $27.3 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. $27.3 billion, Dr. Foreman, is greater than the entire tax revenue of 34 states.
It's amazing, isn't it? To think of one industry in one state producing more revenue for Texas than the entire revenues of 34 states. That's just, it's dumbfounding.
When we say everything's bigger in Texas, folks, we really mean it in the Texas oil and gas industry. This translates to an astonishing amount of $74.8 million a day that directly funds our public schools, our universities, our roads, our first responders, and other essential services. In fact, this past year's achievements really defined Texas oil and natural gas impact in ways that I don't think were ever conceived a few years ago. And it's all because of these member companies and the men and women who show the commitment to innovation and technology, along with that Texas wildcatting spirit that built our great state and is truly thriving still in this new era. Our nation, our economy, and our world are better because of the tremendous gains happening in the Texas oil and natural gas industry.
That's for certain. And to put some context around, $27.3 billion, that's up by over $1 billion from 26.3 last year. And when we think about how much that means, I mean, it's not only the state comparison, it's going directly to schools, to roads, it's through the entire economy in Texas.
And when you think about this number, Dean, of that amount, it is a success for certainly delivering the Lone Star State and putting it on a new plateau. It's shared by every Texan because you don't need to live in the middle of the oil patch or not to benefit from the way these dollars are used. But it's the direct result of policy and partnerships and perseverance. I think those three things really tell a big story. And so I want us to dig a little deeper into the economic impact, how you and James Laval, a consultant, used to be chief revenue estimator for the state of Texas at the Texas Comptroller's Office, worked together to dig into these numbers. And I want us to discuss just how many Texans are directly impacted. Let's start out talking about the number of people who have direct jobs. That's a pretty telling and compelling story all by itself.
It's almost 500,000 people directly employed, 492,000. And that's up almost 30,000 from the year prior. So we've continued to grow, even as the industry is going through efficiencies, and you see the theme about prices kind of moving sideways and all the efficiencies doing more with less, but yet we're growing as an industry.
Well, I think that tells a lot about the true depth of this industry, the impact that it has. I mean, if you think about, if you account for both the direct and indirect benefits to the Texas economy, this industry supported $719 billion, which is nearly $750 billion, and that's a little bit over 30% of the total private sector Texas GSP. That carries a pretty big impact to the rest of the economy.
It carries weight, and it's the quality of jobs as well. I mean, you're talking almost $130,000 average annual wage, 76% higher than the average job across the private sector in Texas. So it really is tremendous economic contribution, not just the macro level, but down at the micro level. Think about how people are actually personally impacted by all
that's benefiting families. It's benefiting communities, because every community, I can tell you, as Ag Commissioner, I visited all 254 Texas counties, which was a lot harder to do than it was to say I'm going to do it. But at the heart of every community, there's a call for jobs. There's a call for security. There's a call for opportunity for advancement. And Texas Oil and Gas has been answering that call with these kinds of numbers. In fact, since 2007, when TXOGA began tracking this data, industry has paid more than $257.6 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. These funds do, again, benefit every single Texan. They do support public education. Some amazing funds that are important to me and to every Texan is the Permanent School Fund and the Permanent University Fund. Deposits to the Permanent School Fund was $1.5 billion, and deposits to the PUF, the PUF, Permanent University Fund, was $1.9 billion. The PSF has earnings that are distributed to public schools through the state funding formulas. The PUF is split between Texas A&M and University of Texas. And I'll tell you, Dean, whoever was negotiating for A&M when this deal was cut didn't cut a good deal, because UT got 2/3, my Aggies got 1/3. My Longhorns pick on me and say that's just simply because the Aggies got first choice, which is greatly offensive to me, but they tell me that every time just the same. The bottom line is it supports public education, higher education in a big way. It also supports our public schools. Texas ISDs received $2.92 billion, and Texas counties received directly $1.03 billion. Big dollars that goes a long way to furthering what goes on in these communities.
It's an amazing set of numbers, bigger than the endowment of Harvard, actually, right?
Isn't that great that the Permanent School Fund in Texas is bigger than Harvard's Education Endowment Fund? That says a lot, folks. And we also have the Rainy Day Fund.
Yeah, and as a former legislator, why don't you talk about how the Rainy Day Fund works?
Well, the Rainy Day Fund is really, the more formal term is the Economic Stabilization Fund, but it was actually the legislature passed a constitutional amendment, and I want to say 1987 timeframe, that dedicated the gross proceeds of severance taxes over a fixed amount that would go into this fund, which is basically the state's savings account. And it's been phenomenal since that fund was created, Dean. $33.9 billion have been dedicated to that account. It's just really, it's exciting. And that you might want to share some numbers of that account, how much was deposited this year and what the state's going to be looking at.
So that's $33.9 billion just from our industry, right? From oil and gas. And for this last fiscal year, it's got a total balance of about $21 billion sitting in it. That's up by almost $7 billion since last fiscal year. So pretty big increases, really healthy and reflecting the strength of the industry.
Well, and we're proud of the fact that oil and gas can make these contributions. I often think, is it congratulations to us or is it condolences that we're paying this much in tax? We're the only industry that pays severance taxes. None other industries do that. And so it's pretty amazing when you think about that. As we look at these numbers, Dean, it's really astounding when you think that the rig count has been declining.
Yeah.
And yet we have greater contributions to the Texas economy. Now, inflation negatively affected a lot of Texas families this last year, very hard on everybody. Some may think that this is just an inflationary factor that led to this increase. You're a Ph.D. economist. You understand inflation. You understand how this works. What's your take on what drove these numbers?
Well, it really is the growth of the industry. We've hit record after record in terms, half dozen different records in terms of natural gas production, Crude oil reached an all-time high of almost 5.9 million barrels per day as of October by official Energy Information Administration estimates. And our projections are that that's sustained through year end. So it's just been hitting on all cylinders. That says this is a volume-based effect. And when you look at prices, they're basically flat to down, depending on whether you adjust for the fiscal year period. But on a calendar year basis, they're actually down slightly for oil, and they're down like 38% year on year for natural gas.
Yeah, natural gas traded negative for around 40% of the year last year, negative prices.
West Texas, yeah. That's right. So this says in terms of...
That's deflation, not inflation, right?
You got it.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. I think it's important. These are all driven by productivity. They're driven by really innovation and what's being done in the industry to produce more with less, which is certainly what they've been doing. Now, when you mentioned almost 5.9 million barrels a day of crude oil, where does that put us? What is Texas' percentage of contribution to the national crude oil production? Where do we stand in oil production and natural gas as a percentage of the national production?
We're for 43% of oil and 29.2% of natural gas, if you want to be precise about it. But this is growing. It continues to edge up, and our share, both in the U.S. market and the global market, is increasing as a result. So Texas is winning here and really helping. This is enabled by market access and exports, continuing growth of export facilities. It's really an energy security story that's helping keep downward pressure on prices at the same time.
And when we think about the production records, tell us what some of the production records were. I mean, was it just a one-time spike, or is this a consistency that we're seeing in oil production?
It really has been consistent, and it's, as you said, endemic in the productivity. So a half dozen different records, month by month, every other month, basically. We had a record in natural gas.
So for 6 out of 12 months, we set a new production record of oil in Texas.
That was natural gas, but oil, it was similar. And
Okay.
they went in lockstep, and because it's Permian Basin, a lot of that natural gas is coming with the oil.
Right.
But think of almost 5.9 million barrels per day, and then we got to add natural gas liquids on top of it.
Right.
That just hit a record 4 million barrels per day out of Texas. So this is huge.
Record after record. Now, some may think we're a little biased in Texas. I kind of think let me just ask you, is it an overstatement to say the Permian Basin is the most important oil basin in the world today as our world sits here?
Absolutely not. It's not an overstatement, because it's the fastest source of growth. It's why the U.S. as a whole has continued to be the fastest single source of growth in the world. When we compare to other basins across the U.S. on a combined oil and gas basis, it's the only one that's really grown markedly. So you see it through merger and acquisition activity in the industry. You see the layered plays and all the complexity. It really is a resounding story that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's really beginning. We haven't talked about well re-stimulations and completions, but the activity level is phenomenal because the potential for future growth is really there.
That continues to make Texas a global energy leader, and I'm excited that we have the generational know-how. We've been blessed with the natural resources. And we've got the right policies in place, because policies matter. I often think about Venezuela. I remember seeing people in food lines. Venezuela has the largest known crude oil reserves in the world, and yet they rank a distant 25th in production. I mean, what's happened here is not happened by chance, folks. It happens because of a dedicated commitment, because of good state leadership, a welcoming environment, and capital has feet, and it can go anywhere it wants to go. I think about the mass exodus out of California, a very vivid example that most Texans are aware of. That can happen with oil and gas. We don't need to take this for granted. Policy does matter. I want to talk about some other records, Dean, and kind of walk through, because it's, we said it's a record-breaking year when we started out. Not only record-breaking for amount of tax revenues and state royalties that were paid, but what are other records that we've covered here?
So the ground that we've covered has been both financially in terms of what we're contributing and as a byproduct of production, but we haven't talked about everything through the value chain after that.
Right.
So the processing, the transportation, all the pipelines. we've got a record amount of pipeline mileage now, and the flows going through it, over 465,000 miles worth of pipelines in Texas.
That'll get you to the moon and back, just about. get you most of the important ways, won't it? What about rig productivity in the Permian? How has that been a factor?
It's key. It's by EIA estimates up over 20%, actually 21 if you want to be precise, year over year. So that's if I run a new rig for a month, how much more output I get. Think of that, over 20% more in just 1 year. It's not just longer laterals. It really is fundamentally the technology, the digitalization, the real-time learning. It's going with data analytics and visualization.
I think that's the key right there, because oil and gas companies are really modern-day innovation and technology companies. They're pioneering technological breakthroughs that's leading to amazing production records. And I was talking to some of our companies the other day who were discussing how because it's automated, because this data is flowing back real time and the systems are automated where they'll automatically make adjustments, that they are actually picking up huge amounts of efficiencies in time that leads to greater production. They're also using these data analytics to determine if the well is maximally being optimized, and it will automatically, he compared it to a stiff shifting transmission that you have to put your clutch in, to an automatic transmission as for the smooth and ease of operations. And I think we're in an automatic transmission phase at this time in production that's making a big difference. You know, we've seen how in the past few years, geopolitical and economic uncertainty has resulted in our allies across the globe literally knocking at the door of Texas in energy need with a great expectation of what Texas can do. So not only, Dean, are we meeting the needs of Texans first, we're being, certainly good partners around our nation, but we're meeting the needs of our allies around the globe. And as we look at the continued problems in Ukraine and Russia that's not been resolved, we look at what's going on in the Middle East, I think people around the world are really looking at Texas and are counting on us.
Yeah, just to reflect that back, you mentioned Venezuela, you talked about Russia, Ukraine, you talked about all the unrest in the Middle East. Despite all of that, we've got $70 per barrel oil. And it hasn't varied very much, right? Historically, that's never been the case. So the shale revolution in Texas, the Permian Basin, it's not just leading in a numerical sense, it's really changing the quality of the predictability in terms of where these markets are and the fact that you can rely on this continued growth, the abundance of affordable oil and gas.
That's a great point, because it affects the pocketbook of every Texan and every American. When you consider in previous times in history, prices have escalated over $100 a barrel, right? And gasoline prices have followed with that. Texas drivers are benefiting because of this technological breakthroughs being implemented real time in the field. It's keeping prices at really historically affordable during these periods of unrest. That's a great point. And right now we want to take you to our sponsor break, and then we'll come right back and finish up with some very important information about production and exports and other good information you need to know. Thanks to a partnership between TXOGA and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, now more than ever, it's easy for small businesses to provide affordable group health coverage for their employees through the TXOGA healthcare plan. With a TXOGA plan, members can choose the right healthcare plan and benefits for them, priced within their budget, with the physicians and providers they trust. TXOGA's healthcare plan is available to small businesses with between 2 and 50 total employees who are headquartered in Texas, members of TXOGA, and aligned to the Texas oil and natural gas industry. If your organization is not enrolled but looking for coverage, visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA. I'll say that again. Visit bcbstx.com/TXOGA to learn more. Visit today. Welcome back. Before the break, Dr. Dean Foreman and I were discussing the numbers from the 2024 Energy and Economic Impact Report, detailing the impact of oil and gas industry in Texas, the key production records that industry has broken along the way. And all of these incredible achievements occurred amid gains in environmental progress. Nothing was sacrificed in meeting the energy needs of the world. And we actually did make great progress. And there's some industry-led initiatives, Dr. Foreman, that made a difference in reducing flaring rates, achieving environmental gains that have previously been unseen anywhere in the world. In fact, between 2015 and 2022, methane emissions actually dropped by 42% in key production regions across the U.S., according to the EPA. Also, I saw a report published by S&P Global Commodity Insights the other day that showed that methane emissions from oil and gas operations in the Permian Basin in 2023 decreased 26% from the previous year. Now, that's equal to the total amount of carbon emissions avoided by every electric vehicle on the road in the United States that year. I think those are big numbers.
They really are. And there's some 27 voluntary efforts across the industry to reduce emissions. The ones that we focus on, the Environmental Partnership together with API.
And those are the two that I was talking about, those two, right?
Yeah, the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition.
Big.
This is where the substantive progress numerically has been coming down. And it's continued. It hasn't just been the proverbial low-hanging fruit. There's continued progress in bringing those emissions down.
Well, it's a collaborative effort that occurs, and, Texas flaring rate dropped by 60% since June of 2019. That's a flaring rate of less than 1% in August of that year. That's very meaningful. Many operators have pledged to have end routine flaring by the year 2030. Many companies have already achieved that. So I think making environmental progress along with production progress is a real testament, again, to the strength of this industry.
Yeah, the production going up, again, record levels, record exports, but yet we're emitting less.
And here in Texas, I think there's a lot of factors, but we have smart policymakers that view industry as a partner. They recognize that we're all in this together. They recognize that we do need to advance progress for the environment and our economy, and also for our energy security, and we don't have to sacrifice one for the other. We're also striving to meet the expectations of the consumers of our products. Market signals are providing clear guidance, and our companies are responding.
That's all you can ask, and that predictability, both in the regulatory framework, again, Texas being pro-business, we're contributing a lot, but we're also getting a predictable environment. It's a good get and give with Texas policymakers in the industry.
I think it's overlooked often how important that predictability is, because if you think about it, these investments are huge. I mean, billions of dollars for a new pipeline, right? I mean, these processing facilities cost enormous amounts of money. The amount of drilling each new well continues to go up every year. And so these are very big investments. And so in order to have consistency, you have to have policymakers that understand that. I'm certainly glad that Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, our statewide leadership in the House and Senate are recognizing that. They also believe in accountability. I mean, we have regulations that have to be complied with. If someone doesn't, they can lose their license, basically, to do business in Texas. You can be fined significant dollar amounts, and those do occur when people find themselves not in compliance. But the bottom line is, in Texas, we treat oil and gas as an asset, not a liability. We treat it as the value that it brings with the jobs that you mentioned of paying over $128,000 per job. 492,000 Texans have a direct job. Indirectly, that means that anywhere from 1.4 million Texans have a job to, I've seen some analysis that indicate that might be 2 million Texans have a job because of this industry. So if you're a Texan, you can thank your lucky stars that we have oil and natural gas here, and it does make a difference in the quality of life. We are making strides. We're more environmentally sensitive to what goes on in terms of production than any place else in the world, and the data backs it up. That's the good news.
Absolutely. It's a really stunning story. The numbers that we've talked about from beginning to end really tell a strong story about innovation, about predictability, a complementarity between the industry and the policies. And again, tip of the iceberg, we're continuing to grow. We're hitting these records month after month. And you never say never, but with that predictability and with some cogent federal policies, we've got the ingredients for success.
We really do. And a lot of the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion about energy transition. And I think there are some antagonists for oil and gas that makes the public think that oil and gas is going to go away. The reality is that no energy source in modern times has ever gone away. we've only added more to that. And so I think the term energy transition should be replaced with energy addition. We are in an energy expansion mode. And I think you've used that term before, the energy expansion mode. I really like that. And I think we need to be talking about this energy addition. Look, we lead the nation in oil production. We lead it in natural gas production. We lead it in wind. And there's been a lot of gains in solar in this last year, too. I saw where ERCOT's data has indicated that's almost doubled, I think, the amount of solar capacity that we have in the state. So Texas is an energy leader. Where does Texas rank in energy consumption nationally?
Number one.
Number one.
Every sector, number one.
There you go. We're number one. We are big stakeholders in this. And I hope our federal policymakers can champion this education opportunity to really have a candid conversation about how all this works.
Perfect story. Really great story for you.
It is. Well, thank you, Dr. Foreman, for doing the work on this. You and James LeBaugh and others on
Absolutely.
Our team do a terrific job, and we're very proud of that. Folks, it's shaping up to be a busy session for the Texas legislature. Our comptroller, Glenn Hager, has said that there's going to be billions in surplus as they go to work for the people of Texas. I'm very proud that oil and natural gas has been a big driver in making that surplus available. The Texas oil and natural gas industry makes an outsized and unmatched contribution to the financial might of our state and the energy leadership of our nation. So we look forward to working with our lawmakers to advance policy that promotes prosperity, security, and progress for every single Texan.
Well, thanks so much, Todd. It's been an honor being here. And the numbers we've discussed today really reflect a shared success story for all of Texas. It's fueled by innovation, partnership, dedication to continuous improvement, the productivity that we've hit on. And Texas energy leadership is really unmatched. So I'm looking forward to an exciting 2025 and seeing how it shapes up.
It'll be fun to discuss it. And to our listeners, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.